It started like any other traffic stop. A white police officer, fresh on his shift, spotted a car going just a little too fast. Flicking on his lights, he pulled the driver over, expecting a routine stop, license, registration, maybe a warning. But as he approached the window, something felt off. The man behind the wheel wasn't nervous or defensive. Instead, he sat there calm, watching the officer with a knowing look. "Good evening, officer," the driver said smoothly. The cop studied his face, searching his memory, trying to place where he had seen him before. Then, like a punch to the gut, it hit him. This wasn't just any driver. This was his police captain, the man who outranked him, the man who ran the very department he worked for. The young officer's stomach dropped. He had just pulled over his own boss. What happened next? Did the officer's nerves get the best of him? Did the captain let him off easy, or did things take an unexpected turn? Stick around, because this story is about to take a twist you won't see coming. For a moment, the officer stood frozen, his mind racing. He had seen his captain plenty of times at the station, but never like this. Sitting in the driver's seat, looking right up at him with an expression that was impossible to read. Was he amused? Annoyed? Disappointed? The officer couldn't tell, and that made his pulse quicken even more. "License and registration," the officer finally managed to say, his voice slightly uneven. He figured he had to follow protocol, no matter how awkward this was. The captain didn't say a word. He reached over calmly, pulled out his wallet, and handed over his ID. The officer barely glanced at it. He already knew exactly who he was dealing with. But handing it back right away felt wrong. Would that make it seem like he was giving special treatment? The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. The officer felt his grip tighten around the documents, his training battling with his instincts. Should he apologize? Pretend he didn't recognize him? Or just keep going as if this were any other stop? Before he could decide, the captain finally spoke. "What exactly did I do wrong, officer?" His voice was calm, but there was something in it that made the officer's stomach tighten even more. The officer swallowed hard. This was the moment he had to decide how to handle the situation. He couldn't back down now. It would make him look unprofessional. But calling out his own captain for a minor traffic violation, that was risky. He shifted on his feet, suddenly aware of how tight his uniform felt. "You were going a little fast back there, sir," he finally said, keeping his voice steady. The captain held his gaze, unreadable. Then slowly he leaned back in his seat, resting one hand on the steering wheel. "A little fast," he repeated, like he was testing the words. The officer nodded, gripping his notepad a little too tightly. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Was this a test? Would the captain respect him for doing his job, or was he about to make an enemy in his own department? The silence between them stretched, thick with tension. From the corner of his eye, the officer noticed another car slowing down as it passed, the driver glancing their way. Just another reminder that they weren't invisible. This wasn't just about him and the captain now. People were watching. And in that instant, the young officer realized something. Whatever happened next could change his career forever. The officer's heart pounded as he stood there, gripping the ticket book in one hand, his other resting near his belt. The captain hadn't broken eye contact, and the weight of his questions still hung in the air. The young cop could feel sweat forming at the back of his neck. He had trained for high-pressure situations, but nothing prepared him for this. A silent standoff with the man who controlled his future. Seconds passed, but they felt like hours. The officer cleared his throat. "Yes, sir. You were over the limit." His voice came out steady, but inside he was unraveling. He knew that technically, he had every right to issue a ticket. but would that be crossing a line he couldn't come back from? The captain exhaled through his nose, tapping his fingers lightly against the steering wheel. Then, just as the officer braced for his reaction, the captain reached over and turned off the engine. The car fell silent. The streetlights above cast a glow over his face, making his expression even harder to read. The officer's hand twitched. He had no idea what was coming next. Would the captain call him out, test his judgment, or was there something else at play here, something much bigger than a routine traffic stop? The officer's pulse quickened as the captain sat in silence, the tension thick between them. Then slowly, the captain reached into his jacket pocket. The officer's body tensed instinctively, his training kicking in, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew better than to react without thinking, especially in a moment like this. The captain pulled out something small, his own badge. He held it up, letting the streetlight reflect off the metal. "You know what this means, don't you?" he asked, his voice unreadable. The officer swallowed hard. Of course he knew. That badge meant authority, power. But right now, it also felt like a test. Was the captain reminding him of his rank, or was this something else? Then, just as the officer opened his mouth to respond, another set of flashing lights appeared in the distance. A second patrol car. Someone else had noticed the stop and had come to check in. The captain let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "Looks like we have company," he murmured. The officer felt his stomach twist. This situation had just gone from tense to something much more complicated. Now, with another officer approaching, he had no idea how this would play out, or how much worse it could get. The second patrol car rolled to a stop, its headlights illuminating the scene. The officer's chest tightened as he recognized the familiar figure stepping out, Sergeant Miller, one of the senior officers in the department. He was known for being by the book, the kind of cop who didn't tolerate mistakes. Miller approached, glancing between the young officer and the captain still seated in the car. His brow furrowed. "Everything all right here?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a subtle weight that made it clear he was assessing the situation carefully. The young officer hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir. Just a routine stop." His own words felt strange in his mouth. Nothing about this felt routine anymore. The captain exhaled, then finally spoke. "Your officer here was just explaining why he pulled me over," he said smoothly, looking up at Miller. Then with a slight smirk, he added, "Apparently, I was speeding." Miller's eyes flipped to the young officer. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, without warning, the captain reached over and flipped open the glove compartment. The officer stiffened, unsure of what was happening. But instead of a registration card or paperwork, the captain pulled out a citation book, one identical to the one in the young officer's hand. He held it up, his smirk widening. "This one's actually mine," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. "I keep it as a reminder." The young officer's pulse pounded. A reminder of what? The captain leaned forward slightly. "A reminder of the time I pulled over my own captain, 20 years ago." His eyes locked onto the young officer's, and in that moment, it all clicked. This wasn't just a traffic stop. This had been a test, a lesson. The air felt thick with realization. Miller let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Guess history repeats itself," he muttered. The young officer's grip on his ticket book loosened. He had been so caught up in the moment, in the fear of making the wrong move, that he hadn't seen the bigger picture. This wasn't about power or rank. It was about integrity, standing firm even when it wasn't easy. The captain exhaled, placing the citation book back in the glove box. "So, officer," he said, voice measured. "What's your call?" The young cop glanced at Miller, then back at the captain. He took a deep breath. Then, with steady hands, he flipped open his ticket book and started writing. The officer's hands were steady now as he filled out the ticket, each stroke of the pen feeling heavier than the last. The captain watched him in silence, his expression unreadable. Sergeant Miller folded his arms, nodding slightly as if waiting to see if the rookie would follow through. When the officer finished, he tore the ticket from the book and extended it toward the captain. For a moment, the captain just stared at it. Then, to the officer's surprise, he chuckled, a deep, genuine laugh that broke the tension hanging in the air. "Didn't think you'd actually do it," the captain said, taking the slip of paper. His eyes flicked over it before tucking it neatly into his visor. "But I respect it." The officer let out a slow breath. He had done the right thing, no matter how uncomfortable it had been. Then, just as the moment seemed to settle, the captain reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times before turning it toward the officer. "Check your email," the captain said with a knowing smirk. Confused, the officer pulled out his phone, his heart still racing. A new message had appeared, an official notice from the department. His breath caught in his throat as he read the subject line. "**promotion, review scheduled**. He looked up, stunned. The captain shrugged. "You passed the test. Now let's see if you're ready for the next step." The officer could barely process what had just happened. What started as a routine traffic stop had turned into a career-defining moment. As the captain restarted his engine, he gave the officer one last nod. "Good call tonight," he said, before driving off into the night. The officer stood there, the ticket book still in his hand, as the second patrol car pulled away. He had faced one of the toughest moments of his career, and he hadn't backed down. As he walked back to his cruiser, one thought ran through his mind. **** tonight, everything changed ***.